it would say this is possible when you knew something was possible and fundamentally you knew it was not possible. So,
Hmm.
and again, they were numerical hallucinations, but they were bad news for the product because we know now that trust is one of the most critical pieces in using AI or digital or anything,
Hmm.
like stuff we take for granted now to be like, well, we really trust it or we know its limitations. So
Right.
yeah, they basically thought my models stunk, right? I could try and say like, they work 97% of the time. Well, guess what? They need to work 100% of the time in water.
Welcome to The Meter, the podcast that digs into the origin stories of the founders, inventors, and entrepreneurs creating exciting innovations in a less exciting but very necessary field, the utilities. We go deep into the trials, risks, and successes that these folks experience, all to make our basic necessities run better, whether that's your tap water, electrifying your home, or bringing internet to your phone. I'm your host, Andrew Dugan. Just a couple of hundred years ago, one of the biggest causes of death was drinking water. Well, not the water, but all the stuff that was in it. Bacteria, viruses, they all caused a range of diseases that seem to be constantly inflicted on humanity. And even after we discovered bacteria and viruses, it still took some time to connect them to typhoid, cholera, and the others that we really don't experience that much today. One of the reasons for this is water disinfection, the practice of removing biological pathogens from drinking water. There's a host of ways to do it, but the most common in the US is chlorine. That's right, it's not just for public pools. It also gets applied to your drinking water so you can feel assured that you won't come down with typhoid when you take a sip. Chlorinating water has had huge public health benefits, but towards the end of the 20th century, we began to realize that chlorine was prone to interact with all the carbon based organics in our water, creating what are known as disinfection byproducts. As more research went into these byproducts, it became clear that some of them were really carcinogenic and being consumed at unhealthy levels. Chris Miller came to experience the health impacts of disinfection byproducts on a personal level. While he was teaching environmental engineering at the University of Akron, his dog passed away from cancer prematurely. And it was also around this time that federal regulators were beginning to take disinfection byproducts more seriously. He came across a study about them, and lo and behold, the city of Akron was one of the examples given for cities that were distributing these byproducts in high numbers. Driven to better his community's water, he directed his research at solving the disinfection byproduct question, engaging the city of Akron, which they very willingly took his help to look for answers. What they found is that it's hard for water treatment plant operators to respond to changes in water quality in real time and on a consistent basis to remove the organics that were interacting with the chlorine. So, with his experience in machine learning, he started to create a program that could run testing virtually, giving operators more information faster than they could do in their labs.
The main part of the regulation that changed is that they used to allow a city to I'll take Arizona, Phoenix, maybe this huge city that covers millions of people, and they would sample 12 locations in that entire city of millions of people, and they could average the 12 locations together. And as long as the average was below a number, they were fine. Well, guess what? They
Right.
started to realize that parts of town, those people were drinking 30% above the average, which was known to be a problem. So the US EPA knew that was happening. I put two and two together that the water takes longer to travel, why it made sense, why that. And so the regulation was going to require all 12 sites had to be below the level. Well, that was going to create additional treatment requirements and all that piece. So it's both a personal realization, yes, via the dog, and also that environmental working group report that said that Akron they were in compliance, but they were definitely at that higher level. And with the new regulation, they were going to have sites that were not going to be in compliance. So I said, hey, yeah,
Okay.
why don't we find a way to help the utilities before where they really have that compliance problem. So, and where that really drove things was to the treatment plant, because all the water leaving the treatment plant eventually goes to the end user, then customers. So we can really optimize treatment. It will enhance the likelihood that the quality will be the best it can be at the end of the system, at the different parts of the system.
Right. Another aspect of this that I think is pretty key with Fontus Blue, but also really interesting is, part of the research you were doing, you were really ahead of the curve when it comes to machine learning, even artificial intelligence, way before it was hot. I mean, early, 2010, you're working on, is it artificial neural networks? And I don't think it's too much to say that you might be at the forefront of water and artificial intelligence coming together, because really early on, you see the potential for machines to do decision making around dosing, which applied to this disinfection byproduct rule that you were trying to help Akron solve. And so you essentially build a really complicated Excel sheet to help those operators make those dosing decisions and making those decisions easier in real time. Tell me about this. Is it your work with Akron that gets you to essentially build this Excel sheet to help them
Yeah, yeah. So
make these
if I
decisions?
have to bring in some Iowa humility, is that for sure, in this narrow but important use case of disinfection byproducts and bringing in neural networks, yes, I'll take the accolades. There's definitely, which a good researcher does, is like I had seen that in Canada in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were using neural networks for turbidity removal. So I was like, well, now there's different challenges to doing it for organics. And so, so took that piece. I had been doing some advanced organics monitoring, which they had done in wastewater. I was one of the leaders to do it in drinking water. So I took something from another, sort of adjacent realm and brought it in. So I took neural networks on turbidity. I took advanced organics monitoring from wastewater, brought those two things together, and then pushed forward. And that's where the research piece came in, and some of those key
Mm,
tools, and really putting those together. And then, and again, it was really Akron that allowed us to do a lot of that sampling at the plant and a lot of those things, and help validate and really push forward on what makes sense, what didn't make sense in the tool, and continues to, even to this day. I met with them this morning. We were talking about, actually, this is probably pretty cool to share, is that there's the US EPA is releasing, they released some updated software around, like, I'm going to call it a cocktail because that's kind of what it is, but it's not a cocktail you want to drink. Of that chlorine piece does form a lot of these different disinfection byproducts, and they have different carcinogenicity, the toxicity, like, mutagenicity. There's a lot of things that, in terms of what, not just the regulated level, and it's sort of that next phase of thinking about the water we're drinking, and, being better than the regulation, and actually trying to craft towards maybe the least harmful that it can be. Had a conversation this morning with the city of Akron about assessing the water they're producing from that standpoint, which should be super progressive. And I think in the right way to think about it is, not just, oh, we're 30% below and 40% below the regulated level. Those combinations of those compounds have very different toxicity. And that also leads why there's going to be a new revision to the DBP rules, because they know that. They know that these compounds have a different impact, let alone right now we just total them up. And as long as the number's below 60 or below 80, we call it good. But they know different compounds, like I said, have a real different impact. So, um, so that just again to kind of share how they continue is, they want to be leaders in the industry. It
Yeah.
will push us to be okay. Well, let's figure out how to assess that. Basically, create a new metric for themselves that's not even a regulated. Now, it will help support the regulated thinking. It wouldn't never compromise that, but it will definitely, push the industry forward, which is what they've been a key catalyst.
Yeah, to your point, yeah, Akron's, willingness to work with you is a big reason why Fontus Blue was able to develop, or at least your virtual jar product was able to develop because they were willing to be a guinea pig. And again, before the product was ever on cloud, before it was ever a software and it was just an Excel sheet, they helped you build what ends up being in 2015 a full-on pilot for the decision making. Now, what's funny is we know now because everyone's familiar with ChatGPT that there's hallucinations with artificial intelligence, and you actually experienced some of this during your pilot. Can you tell me about the findings of this pilot?
Yeah, so it was actually a published paper on Akron's data where we use neural networks for this also makes sense to what I said earlier to do both
Mhm.
turbidity and organics modeling. So we did some things differently than how Canadians and others had done the turbidity part. We definitely were publishing something new on the organics part. But so that worked, looked great. We deciphered some things. And then as we rolled that out and they started getting, let me back up a second. I like to say simulation is different than optimization. So being able to simulate something is different than being able to recommend or optimize something. So that's
Yeah,
just the simulation part of it. And while it could simulate things, when you want to discover, like, hey, what are better paths? Yeah, that's where you get into the recommendations. And the recommendations, when we started looking at them and actually getting those directly to Akron and others, it would say this is possible when you knew something was possible and fundamentally you knew it was not possible. So, and again, they were numerical hallucinations, but they were bad news for the product because then all of a sudden is we now know, I mean, we know now that trust is one of the most critical pieces in using AI or digital or anything, like stuff we take for granted now to be like, well, we really trust it or we know its limitations. 7 or 8 years ago, those were new terms or weren't even terms, right? So
right.
yeah, they basically thought my models stunk, right? When it was like, and I could try and say like, they work 97% of the time. Well, guess what? They need to work 100% of the time in water. Otherwise, they're like, yeah, we're not
Yeah,
going to,
otherwise it's too risky.
yeah.
Despite the results from the Akron pilot being shaky, you all learned a lot from the experience and it didn't discourage you. You actually launched Fontus Blue officially after the pilot and received a grant from the state of Ohio, the Glide. How does it feel at this point to be making the leap of starting a business while you're still a professor?
Yeah. So we were fortunate that, or I was fortunate, the University of Akron had what was called the University of Akron Research Foundation. Its
Mm,
function was to help license technologies, promote businesses, if you will. And so a lot of people there, can't name them all. Um, but Wayne, Elise, I mean, Dan, Hamper, just a whole bunch of people there that were supportive of, I'd call it kind of the old way engineering schools used to operate. A lot of them businesses came out of engineering. So they helped promote, they helped us think about those things. And so they introduced the Glide. That's the connection back to Glide and getting some funding. And so it did create a new challenge, obviously, of trying to run a business. And but I had the flexibility, and I also had really I kept my research pretty practical, pretty focused, and made sure that I didn't create any conflicts between. That's basically why I did started the business, was so that I could have employees, so that I could keep the two two things
Keep it
being
separate.
in separate.
Yeah.
And the beauty was that a lot of my students got access to data that they could simulate and use in their dissertations. So they weren't creating it themselves. It was the plant that was creating the data. So it created that nice, clean, separation. And so they could get their dissertations. I could publish papers. And then meanwhile, if there was some heavy algorithmic piece that I had full-time employees that were making sure that that was kept on the Fontus side. So, yeah.
And so tell me about those initial sales calls that you're doing here. I mean, you have an Excel sheet, that you're perfecting. I don't know if you've gone to the cloud at this point when you're
Yeah.
first calling people. And again, this is 2015, 2016, 2017. People aren't familiar with artificial intelligence. It's not in the zeitgeist yet. And so I imagine when you're calling these people and telling them that a machine can help them with decision making on coagulation and chemical use, they don't believe you. I imagine, especially in those initial years, they say, "You're crazy," or "That's way too high tech for us. Come again another day." Yeah, what are those first objections when you're
Yeah.
trying to find clients?
I think you nailed them. I mean, and basically that everybody is pretty skeptical. So I think that the the ways that it kind of overcame that, I leaned on pretty heavily on some good professional relationships. So Orange
Mhm.
Schneider, who is a stalwart in the industry, was at American Water and now is at GHD and is like a national leader in an area. So he's working at American Water. He knows American Water is concerned about their coagulant costs. So I could kind of go in and be like, kind of leaning on, their reputation and their word. And
Yeah,
that would at least kind of crack the door. And then it's still very much a show me process, right? So I think that we purposely made things not be so bell and whistle advanced, like kept them more in kind of a simplified user interface and those kinds of things, and really did hone in on what could be the most useful information presented in the most straightforward way that wouldn't so we weren't trying to wow them. We were really just trying to help them do that core chemical dosing job better. So, yeah, I think I was actually just laughing with team member number two today and team member number one. They were we were discussing some of the new roadmap feature things. And I made the comment to them. I said, well, you guys know I can sell it. You guys just have to build it. And they started laughing. They said, we've been used to a decade of this with you, Chris. That they said the problem is that you sell stuff that we don't have built yet. I'm like, but I know you're gonna deliver on that. So anyway, yeah, I think we've talked about this a great team being able to kind of go from Excel, MATLAB application to cloud, what I mean, and but all in line with is the customers kind of helping let us know what those progressions should look like. I'm pretty good
absolutely.
at laying a vision for the customer, not so much a vision of what the product looks like, but what the new jobs I just mentioned one today, right? Hey, if we can actually assess the real risk of the water, not just the regulated numbers, they're like, wow, that would be really impactful. So let's make it happen. And then we find a way to make it happen and work directly with them on how to make it useful and implement it into the workflow, the focus. And so I think we've dialed in that process really well and dialed in a real good team and just that real partnership with some of the leading utilities in the country that, definitely want to do water treatment, you know, above and beyond what's required.
Right. And so where are your first couple of sales? Who are those initial adopters that you win over and convinced to try this?
Yeah. So obviously, we mentioned a lot about Akron. I mentioned American Water out in Jersey. We were also fortunate. A lot of uh, so I Interstate 76 goes east and west through a decent part of Ohio, and we almost own that corridor of the decision. Like you can literally drive on that road, Alliance, Barberton, Ravenna, Akron. I don't want to get in trouble and forget somebody along that corridor now, well, and all the way over to now Aqua, Ohio is near Youngstown. But we it's a small world in water. And so that ability to be like, oh, you did it at Ravenna, you could almost just, it was kind of like go in proximity. And even though they would have a different water source, or it's like I said before, leaning on like Orange Schneider and those friends, now I could just lean on, a, you know, um, Terry Palmer from Barberton, who's no longer with us, was amazing team supporter. I could say, "Hey, call Terry," and Terry'd be like, "I was skeptical, but you guys really should give it a try." And that usually was enough to, and so we definitely went the old referral based method was a pretty heavy duty approach of ours.
Word of mouth is still the best marketing out there. And yep, absolutely. It means everything because, like you said, those neighboring plants, all those guys know each other. They probably all work together. And, operators change, where they work all the time. And it cross pollinates that information and they trust their friends and their coworkers. And so that's huge. And so clearly it's working, right? Because you pick up some steam in 20 from 2015 to 2019, you're seeing a lot of growth. So much so that, and you mentioned this in a previous podcast, that tell me if I'm wrong, but in 2019, you guys almost went insolvent. It sounds like you had to get two shareholders to write some big checks to keep you guys going. I imagine it's not because of a mismanagement. I imagine Fontus Blue is going through so much growth that you hit that wall, that cliff of, oh, we need an injection of cash in order to get to this next echelon of business maturity. But I'll let you tell me, what is happening in 2019 that causes this need for liquidity?
Yeah, I think that I'll probably own it as a little stubbornness on my part to be bootstrapped, meaning that like, hey, we should be
Mm-hmm.
able to. And so I didn't fully appreciate there's a reason that you get capital, whether it's X $1,000 or 10X, like companies need capital to continue to build out infrastructure and then do. And so I think it was my, um, you know, uh, of skills as a CEO to see that. And so you know, we just hit that point as you alluded to it. So
Right.
it's probably a big chunk of it was my fault. I didn't really fully appreciate. We need to invest in some people, really get some additional people, and that usually, especially in the early stages, means you're gonna run in the red. I mean, we're by no means, Amazon, but you hear the stories. Amazon didn't make money for 10, 12 years or whatever. Well, it's because they had a good business. They had to keep investing, and then
Exactly.
eventually you reach a nice, repeatable, scalable, profitable. So that really, I think it was it. And then again, I had a couple board members, Peter Fisk and Gary Spring, that were amazing and helped us out get that through that hump and on to COVID.
On to COVID.
Yeah.
That's right, because COVID is huge. And it appears that when you guys are going on these calls, a lot of people are saying, yeah, dialing in our chemical usage would be great, but it's more of a nice to have and maybe not necessarily a top priority when you're going on these calls. And when March 2020 comes around and I mean, just completely disrupts the cost of materials, the lead times. Suddenly, optimizing chemical becomes top priority for all of these water plants because again, costs they weren't considering, lead times, they don't know when they're going to get their next shipment. They now have to really dial in their chemical use. And so the use case for Faunus Blue, this not Faunus Blue, but virtual jar and everything you guys offer, suddenly you guys become really important and what you're doing becomes a lot more attractive to the industry. Tell me about what's happening in 2020, 2021 at Faunus Blue. I imagine it's a big moment of growth for you all.
Yeah. And so like there's two tailwinds. One, you mentioned kind of the supply disruption that led to significant price increases, which
Hmm.
again won them to dial it in. And then the second tailwind was being able to have virtual meetings. Like people didn't really, I mean, it's hard to believe now, right? But 6 years ago, I didn't know what Zoom was. I didn't, know what
Hmm. No one did.
Teams, and I was a faculty member. We knew of like distance learning. We had a distance learning room. And then all of a sudden in 2020, it's like, whoa, whoa, wait a second. You got to actually be able to teach class, meet, do all that stuff. So I think that being able to communicate with people and uh, do sales, do support, like that became another tailwind at our backs that also uh, really helped water people again. Because that trust, how would we build trust with somebody from Idaho? They actually were fine with talking to their peers in Ohio or in some other state. It wasn't like they just had to rely on their within their geographic piece. It kind of expanded that hey, if I've got peers I can trust, why not leverage them also?
Right. And so over the next few years, Fontus really grows, and you have to pardon me. As Fontus grows over the next few years after COVID, you really have to step up as a CEO. I imagine a lot of things change in your position as the business grows and what the definition of CEO is in that case. And I bring it up because in 2024, you had a bit of a health scare with your blood pressure dropping, and it seems like stress finally got to you of just it's a massive responsibility. All the people that you have working for you and giving them paychecks and keeping the business running, again, all while being a professor at a university and having grad students working for you. You're working a lot, and it finally gets to you, and so as much as you wanna share, I'm just curious about what this is like in 2024 as you hit this wall, essentially, of you've
Yeah,
run yourself
it was
ragged.
fortunate that um, yeah, again, that I think there's like these financial wake up calls we already talked about, and then yeah, the the health one um, definitely had to be pretty significant. Otherwise, I probably would have kept on going. I
Mhm.
know as we talked, I had shared. I thought I was just having headaches and whatnot, where they really were just pressure surges. Literally, they were causing the headaches from the stress. Had probably been going on 6 months before things really got bad. Um, you know, I was uh, fortunate, to kind of be able to get a little bit of a reset, but it was soon after that the opportunity with Usalco. I mean, I had been talking to Usalco, but it really helped harden for me. Like I
Mm.
didn't have the energy or the wherewithal to do probably 5 more years of different investment cycles. And Usalco's mission aligned so wonderfully with what Fontus Blue's mission and vision, where it was like, it really was, a massive opportunity on all the right fronts to really focus on that, retire from the University of Akron in 2025, not to speed that up, but both hey, merge with Usalco and retire from the university and pull all that together. And basically, 1 year from that event, it was crazy to go from, doing both, yeah, doing all that. And then fast forward 15 months later, the company had been sold and, ours.
You got ahead of me a little bit,
Yeah.
but that's exactly where I was going, yeah, and no worries, so in 2025, this past year, you sold Fontus Blue to Usalco, which is a chemical company. And, the synergy makes a lot of sense. You help customers use their chemicals correctly, and so you were bought by a chemical company, and you're coming in as their digital division, essentially. And you've retired from being a CEO, and you're now the vice president of digital services for Usalco. How's that been? I know it's still a little new for you as of this recording, but how has it been transitioning from owner, founder to now being an employee again and
Yeah.
getting a salary and you're still at the helm and directing those products that you created, but in a bigger environment. And so, yeah, tell me about that transition.
Yes, uh, for which was the majority of our employees came along with, and it's been fantastic for me to be able to have them move into other teams that have experience and resources to support them. So when I mentioned I had a call today with the two employees, number one and number two, they're now working with somebody that's got cybersecurity expertise, that's got 25 years. They're working with digital IT person, so that's been really fulfilling to see, to be able to now, because oftentimes I tried to be that mentor resource, back to that whole part of being CEO of a
Yeah.
small company, and trying to support your employees and do those things. So that's been, I mean, that's been really good. The other piece is that, I mean, the Usalco leadership team is amazing. And so, when they talk about being an agent for good, it is oriented towards this water quality and all the things we've been talking about, like just treating the water to permit compliance. I mean, they definitely want to actually impact things. And one third the country drinks water treated with Usalco coagulants. So June was the official part, and so now we're 7, 8 months in. We grew from like 15 states where we had digital to now we're at 25. Uh, Usalco has this huge footprint where they're doing that, and so I think the ability to really catalyze water
Mhm.
treatment into, using digital and AI. Again, all these things, Andrew, you're saying that are like, we now think are really second nature the last couple of years. Um,
Right.
I think that I would call that the new third tailwind, right? To the whole part of adoption is that AI all of a sudden becoming vernacular and our core customers. When we're
Commonplace.
operators using it, think, it's like, wait a second, yeah, I'm using Google Maps to tell me how to go from here to the airport, and I'm using, so now their adoption into their world makes it less of a barrier to now be in water treatment. I think last thing, we just held a workshop out in California, and one of the exciting things we were talking about is really how are we going to bring agentic AI, or where we can actually have the AI,
Mm,
some of the multi-step, multitask kind of pieces, not adjust the chemical dose, but at least maybe go through even the logic they were going through to arrive at a decision. If it can now do that work in like 8 seconds, and now you're just reviewing that work and being like, there's real opportunity here to still leverage virtual jar and the recommendations, but now use agentic AI on top of that to really make their jobs even, uh, easier. So pretty exciting.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. It sounds like Virtual Jar 3.0 is coming out soon, and
Yep.
you're working on some new stuff. Another thing that I think is sort of full circle is that Akron actually won a water quality award from AWWA. And so you guys, and you're part of that success, right? Is that they clearly cared a lot about turning things around back in 2008, and you see that their culture of trying to improve and working with you and all that is clearly paid off. And they've gone from, again, a case study of why disinfection byproducts need to be better managed to, being an acclaimed water provider. And so that's exciting that you guys have been a
Well,
part
and
of their success.
and their culture of leadership continues on. I mean,
Mhm.
I think when you and I chatted, they just put out a story how they removed their last lead service line. And to put that in perspective, I was actually talking to somebody today about another utility that has many I don't want to name because I'd love to get them as a client here. But they're like 18 years away from probably having their last lead service line replaced. And so Akron, um, started pursuing that in the 80s. So that continues that kind of mindset. And so, again, there's something we didn't have anything to do with that, boy, really puts their, mark on things. And so,
Yeah.
while they had those challenges, it's, yeah, definitely, I like to say, it's not my phrase, but borrowed from Ray Dalio, pain plus reflection equals progress. So they always use some pain, whether it's, oh, we got to get rid of these lead services. They reflect on it, think about it, and then they do something about it. And that's how they've operated. And it's been excellent to be at least a small piece in that puzzle with them on the drinking water side.
So, Chris, you did 30 year. I mean, you're a retired professor. You built a company, scaled it up, sold it, and you're not even 60 years old. You essentially had a very successful career. And if you wanted to just walk away and be done, you could, and no one would blame you. And you could hang your hat knowing you've had a successful career. I think 59 in May is what you told me when we first talked. You have a granddaughter now. Yeah, obviously you have your position at Usalco, but what's next for you? Do you have another company in mind? Do you want to keep going, or you just want to be a granddad and be
Yeah.
done?
So,
What are your plans?
and I don't know if you know uh, uh, my wonderful boss will hear this or not, but he will appreciate this. Is we, still, I would say world domination, but since Usaco's on the United States, we want to get these digital tools in the hands of as many operators. For me, probably the next
Absolutely.
3 to 4 years. That's what. So I've kind of committed to no formal commitments to Usaco. These are my own sort of personal. I think that about
Okay.
about 3 years, and what we have that I'd honestly would like to get into at least 1,000. There's 50,000 plus in the U.S., so that'd be 20% of the market. I'd like to get our digital dosing support tools in the hands of operators. And so that was kind of the mission vision, to be really, really impactful and kind of,
Right.
I mean, I get it. It'd be my legacy, my team's legacy, Usalco's legacy is that, to really have moved water that direction. So I know that's, well, still now that, see, now I only have one job. So instead of having two, the things I can, I definitely every quarter I intend to travel. So taking the family, we're all Italy this summer. I've never been to Italy. We went to
Amazing.
Ireland last October. So we're making a point to, stop and smell the roses or do those things and, make some life memories and doing that in parallel. So, but yeah, for sure. Still have a little more in the tank that want to do in the industry, and excited about it. I've got one daughter that's an engineer, and also help maybe create a little bit of a path for her to jump on as well. So, or maybe even the grandson too.
Chris's story is such a great example of starting locally with entrepreneurship. Look for problems that are around you, and almost inevitably, there's other people in other places dealing with the same thing that could use your expertise or the idea you come up with. The Fontus Blue story was fascinating, and it's really cool to see how he's stayed on despite being bought out and, essentially achieving what most founders want, which is the buyout, to be acquired. And so it'll be exciting to see with him staying on where it goes with Usalco. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Please tune in next time. I'm Andrew Dugan, and this is The Meter.